The field of sound studies has kind of predominantly been focusing on Western cultures. And in the last couple of years, there's a change that's been happening there of listening in to other cultures, and my own work contributes to that change, kind of broadening the horizon, the geographical horizon of the field of sound studies. And one example that I've been working on over the last couple of years is the role of sound in colonial India. So I look both at sound in literature, in colonial literature, by, for example, Rabindranath Tagore or Sarojini Naidu, so authors who are writing in English, where sound plays a certain role, and often a role that somehow goes against kind of the colonial power hierarchies. Another example that I've been researching on is the role of the radio in late colonial India. So the radio, traditionally understood as a technology, as an instrument of imperial control, but also how was that medium, how was that technology used by people involved with the anti-colonial movement? How did they use that instrument in order to kind of maybe subvert or at least undermine colonial power?
So recently I've been interested in looking at how we conceptualize myths, legends, folklore, this kind of things. We are very often trapped in an idea of, for instance, mythology or legends as the product of irrationality or ignorance or gullibility. I'm more interested in the other side of the matter. What happens if we start looking at these things as, for instance, the transmission of folklore as the product of what I call social critique? So the attempt on the part of people to actually articulate another view of society, for instance.
First, I study representations of aging in literature, film, and photography. I also study literature-based approaches to dementia care and how older artists give meaning to creativity in the later stages of their career. And a more recent trend is connected to the age-friendly university. I think that all my research is really driven by a deep concern about ageism in our society. I think of all isms, ageism is probably the one that gets least attention, even though it's a very urgent matter. If you think of the corona pandemic or even the climate crisis, generations are pitted against each other, and often older people are positioned as burdens and even as those who are responsible for ruining our planet. And so in all my work, I really would like to arrive at a better understanding of the diversity within the group of older people and also move away from ageist practices that are not based on fact.
My research concerns inclusion and exclusion mechanisms, and I'm interested in how these are operative not just in society, but also inside of institutions, and I focus on cultural institutions. So the research that I'm doing is very much engaged with questions of inclusion and accessibility. And of course, these have meaning in activist circles, but and policy documents, but they're also being discussed as key concepts that need to be interrogated and thought through in critical manners. And one of the things that we've been talking about that I find particularly inspiring is the notion of emotional accessibility. I find it very important because he distinguishes between technical accessibility to archives and collections and materials, heritage type materials, and emotional accessibility, which refers more to the capacities that one brings to engage with such material.
My research is basically looking at museum practices, and I'm particularly interested in conservation and curating, and specifically interested in how new artistic art forms challenge or give affordances to museum practices, especially considering lots of larger societal developments and challenges. Think of the discussions about inclusivity and decolonializing our institutions. These discussions and discourse really take place more in the kind of representational space, in curating, but not so much behind the scenes in relation to conservation practices. But in my view, that's actually what the heart of the museum is, the collection and ownership, and that's where you should also ask these kind of questions.
The main aim of this project is to question the representation of the Holy Roman Empire in maps, because in previous periods, the maps have always highlighted how fragmented the Holy Roman Empire was, and they have shown all the different principalities in different colors and given the impression that there wasn't much of a cohesion. And we would like to show that all these tiny principalities were very much interconnected. They had social relations, but also economic ties. And we want to remap the empire, focusing more on these overlapping connections that these territories had.